Hi church family, this is Matilda. I know that she is who you actually wanted to see, so here she is. Oh, wave at the camera. You being sweet? Yeah. This is Matilda. She turns a year old on May 1st, and she says hello and that she loves you, or she would if she could. Hi everyone. For those of you who maybe don't know me, my name's Flanigan. I was at Emmanuel for a long time, and now me and Valerie, my wife, and our daughter Matilda, who you saw at the beginning of the video, we're missionaries in Hawaii. Right now we're in a similar situation to the rest of you guys. We are locked up in our place for the most part. We go to the grocery store, we go for walks, we FaceTime our families, but for the most part we're just at home doing home stuff, I guess. And for me, it's been a real blessing to get to spend so much time with Matilda. I don't take for granted that most dads my age probably don't get to spend this much time with their daughters. So this is trying to really cherish and enjoy that time. But it's been a weird time for us, just like it's been a weird time for everybody else. Thanks for keeping us in your prayers. Before I really jump into the word here, I really do want to thank you guys. This has been I think for us to feel the love and appreciation and just generosity of our church family has been really special and unique and humbling. And I think there's a special place in heaven for people who support missionaries. And I just am so grateful for the love and support that we felt from our home church. And it's a blessing that not all missionaries have. Not all people who go out into all the world to preach the gospel have the support of a home church like you guys, and we don't take that for granted. It's so special. It's so special. And just to illustrate that really quickly, around the first of the year when we had to send out tax receipts and stuff like that, we had to collect all of these addresses so we could send out our tax receipts and all these things. And basically all I had to do was go find the who's who, or the church directory, whatever we call it these days, because you guys are the people who support us. And you have made it incredibly easy to be here. You've been so generous with us. And we just can't, Valerie and I, and Matilda, if she was capable of these feelings, I'm sure she'd be so grateful to you guys. So thank you. And we love you. And I'm excited to get to share with you today. If you want to follow along with me, get out your Bibles and go to Hebrews chapter 10. We're going to be in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 32, and then through chapter 11, verse 1. And Hebrews chapter 11 is the very famous faith chapter, and so we're going to kind of lead into that piece there. But I want to talk today just about the relationship between faith and community and perseverance, and how all of those things go together. The whole book of Hebrews, it's a plea to press on, to keep going, to not give up, to not quit, to keep going. And and for them specifically, the suffering they were experiencing was persecution. They experienced an enormous amount of persecution, these early Christians, both from the Roman side, the Gentile side, but also from their Jewish families and friends and those sorts of people, because these were primarily Jewish Christians who were reading this letter, and they experienced persecution from all sides. And because they had this deep, steeped Old Testament mindset, the book of Hebrews is really framed around the way that Jesus fulfills Old Testament prophecy, the way he goes above and beyond Old Testament elements. And so the book of Hebrews is, for these early Christians, a plea to press on through persecution, and to pretend like we're in a normal situation right now, or to pretend like I'm just giving some talk in the middle of the week during a normal week and everyone's normal lives would be ridiculous. We're not. This is a weird time. And I really believe that this passage gives us some wisdom for how to move forward, how to move forward together. And so I want to talk about that. These, like I said, are people who've suffered immensely, and the author of Hebrews is asking them to hold on to the promises of God so that they will endure through hardship. All through Hebrews, he talks about how Christ is the better tabernacle, the better sacrifice, the better priest, And he wants to make that clear that Jesus is the better of all those things so that they don't turn back to a normal tabernacle, try to go back to normal sacrifices, try to go back to normal priests. You don't want to do that. And chapter 10 is even more intense. Perhaps the climax of that warning to press on. He talks about sinning deliberately and the judgment of God on profaning the sacrifice of Jesus and all these things. And he's telling them simply, don't quit. Don't quit the faith. Don't go back to your old ways. Don't go back to the old life. Don't go back to the old system. Don't go back to the old religion. He's saying if you press on, if you keep going through this, I know it's hard, but if you'll press on, it'll be beautiful. And so he's saying, don't quit the life that Jesus has for you, the abundant life, the special life. And the other thing that I don't want us to miss before I read this passage is that this is all in the context of a community of faith. Okay, so in our vernacular now, we don't really have a plural you. Like in the King James, if you're reading from the King James, you'll read ye or something like that. It basically just means you all, and we don't really have a word for that unless you're from the South, in which case you say y'all or all y'all. And I want us to have that kind of mindset, that all y'all mindset, because if we have the just me mindset, we'll miss the big picture of this passage, which is that we're supposed to do this in a community. We're supposed to do this together. And you're gonna, as we read this, you're gonna realize, oh, I couldn't do this by myself because I have to go visit people and be generous and things like that. And so you hopefully realize that, but I just don't want us to miss the fact that almost all the time in the New Testament, it's not talking to one person, it's talking to a group of people, it's talking to all y'all, right? And we take for granted community, and because we're so independent, we're so caught up in our own deal, independence is a real value for us, and that's okay. But think about these first century believers. Think about these believers back in the day. Think about how if they wanted to read the word, if they wanted to read this letter, for example, they'd have to go to the guy's house who got the letter, right? Like, if you wanted to read the Bible, you might have to go to somebody else's house in order to read the scriptures, because maybe A, you didn't have it, or maybe B, even if you had it, you wouldn't be able to read it. And so you got to go to the guy's house who can read it. You got to go to the guy's house who has it, right? And so they're hungry for the text. They're hungry for the truth. They're hungry in this new life. They're like, man, I believe in Jesus, but I don't know everything about Jesus. I don't have all these commentaries. I don't have 40 different versions of the English Bible to go through, right? Like, it's scarce. The truth is scarce. And so they treasured these community moments, and they also needed these community moments. So don't miss that in our independent mindset, in our independence. Don't miss that the Bible is about community, that the New Testament is about community. One of the Wesleys, John or Charles, you can figure it out, he said that the New Testament knows nothing of solitary religion. And I think what he's saying is that Christianity was never supposed to be alone. It was never supposed to be alone. It was never supposed to be solitary. It was supposed to be together, a dynamic, like, give and take and unity without uniformity, but in the midst of conflict and all these things, you'd have unity. That's what faith, the community of faith, is about. And so I just want to, as background, say that these people were suffering. These people knew Jesus, but were struggling in their early faith. Okay, and also, these people were dependent on community. They needed community. So let's read this passage. This is Hebrews chapter 10, verse 32. It says this. Remember, this is right after a really stern warning about sinning on purpose. And I don't want to gloss over that and pretend like that's not there. But I want to focus on this here. So verse 32, but recall, look back to the former days when, after you were enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings. And let's just look at these sufferings. Sometimes being publicly exposed to reproach and affliction. Sometimes being partners with those so treated. For you had compassion on those in prison. You joyfully accepted the plundering of your property, since you knew that you yourselves had a better possession and an abiding one. Therefore, do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward. For you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what is promised. For yet a little while, and the coming one will come, and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith. But if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. Like, I don't want God to say that about me, right? But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and preserve their souls. And now chapter 11. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And then chapter 11, the very famous chapter, it goes on to express all these people in the Old Testament who lived by faith. And remember, those Old Testament people were, to them, the heroes of their faith. They were who they looked back to. They were who led up to Jesus, right? So that chapter would have been very powerful for those people, and I hope it is for us too. So he's telling them, what I think he's telling them is this: don't quit. Just don't quit. And I think he's telling them this: don't quit together. Like, do the thing, do the not quitting thing, do it together. Don't give up this fight and do the fight together. Don't let your brothers and sisters fall behind. And then he brings back to their memories how they used to be, right? He says, remember the former days when you were... The key hidden in all of this is faith, okay? So faith is the thing that unlocks everything else in this passage. Without faith, none of the rest of this is going to happen. It unlocks this endurance. It makes this endurance possible. And that endurance is sort of the main idea of this book. But it calls faith the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And this is a familiar definition. I don't know if it helps you. I often don't define faith like this in my own heart, right? Like, maybe if you ask me what does faith mean, I'd go Hebrews 11:1, right? But I often just define it as certainty. And what my heart means by certainty is tactile. It's I can touch it, see it, taste it, feel it. It's here. This is certain. But this definition helps me when I really think about it. And so let's put this in context again. So they endured a hard struggle with sufferings. They were publicly exposed to reproach and affliction. They were put in prison, and their property was plundered. That's what verses like 32 to 39 say. And they needed faith because they couldn't see, right? They needed faith because they couldn't touch, taste, feel all of these promises. And let me just let's go through a couple things here. But, oh Jesus, you're the resurrection and the life. And then their friends are killed. Oh Jesus, you are the bread of life. You are our provider. And then our house gets plundered, right? Or, oh Jesus, you promised to fight for me against my enemies. And then they're publicly exposed to insults and they're afflicted and they're kicked out of their synagogue and all these things. And we so often thank Jesus for being our daily bread while we are eating bread, right? Or we thank him for being the God of life while we're holding our new baby. We thank him for being our champion and our king while we're on top of the world. And I think we misunderstand faith and we define it as certainty. And so we struggle to hold on to it when everything gets broken. Does that make sense? Like, we don't believe in the prosperity gospel, praise the Lamb, but our lives fall apart when we're not prosperous. Like, we don't believe in the health and wealth gospel, praise God, but we crumble when we aren't healthy or when someone close to us is struggling, right? And I mean this in love. Like, I'm talking to myself right now. I don't mean this as an accusation. What I'm saying is that when we call faith that kind of tactile certainty, we can't handle it when it doesn't happen, right? Faith is certainty, but it's certainty without proof. It's the conviction of things unseen. It is assurance of the invisible. It is declaring that Jesus is the resurrection and the life while death is all around us. It's declaring that Jesus is the bread of life while there's no bread in our life, right? It's loving the fact that Jesus is our good shepherd even when it feels like he has driven us off a cliff. That's the desperate faith. That's the assurance, the conviction of things not seen. As desperate faith. And Paul, or whoever the author is, of Hebrews, declares this so beautifully. We are not those who shrink back and are destroyed. No. He says we are those who have faith and preserve our souls. We are victors. We are conquerors through Jesus. But are we? Right? Like, are we those people? I hope so. Like, I really hope so. I hope our faith is the kind of faith that sustains us right now. I hope we have the kind of faith that doesn't shrink back and is destroyed, but the kind of faith that perseveres. I really hope so. But I just want us to think through this. I want me to think through this right now. Many of us, not all of us, but many of us live cushy lives. Cushy lives. And when our cushy gets just a little less cushy, we start to fall apart. Do you have faith in those moments? Real, true, lasting faith that won't let you quit. This is why James tells us that when we face trials, we should rejoice. We should rejoice. This is why Paul says that he uses the term granted. It has been granted to you, to some, to suffer for the sake of Christ. Because when we suffer, when we face trials, the tested genuineness of our faith produces steadfastness, what James says. Perseverance that won't let us quit. And what does Hebrews tell us? It's the warning is there. His soul takes no delight in those who quit. I don't want to be someone who quits. I don't want to be someone that, I want to be someone that God looks at the end and says, well done, good and faithful servant. Well done to you whose faith persevered. Well done to you who endured. I want to be that person. I want to know my faith is going to sustain me. And I read this passage and I look at my circumstances right now. I look at a lot of my family and my friends' circumstances. And I'm like, do I have that kind of faith? Is it there? And then, and this is the amazing thing about what the Bible tells us about faith. It says that faith is a gift. So we got to pray. We got to pray. We got to pray. And we got to trust that the Holy Spirit is working, right? Because that's what he says. He says, but I'm sure of better things pertaining to salvation for you. And I want that for me too. I want perseverance that won't let me quit. But what are we doing now? I mean, I want to look quickly at what the people did for each other and think about it in our context right now. They gave and they gave and they gave. They had compassion on the poor and the imprisoned. Okay, so they obviously their persecution meant some people were imprisoned, some people even died. But what actually happened to a lot of folks is that they would lose connections in the community. They'd lose their business. They would lose, maybe their family was like where they worked. It's who they worked with, everything. And their family said, get out. I don't want you here anymore. So they lose their social connection. They lose their safety net. They lose their network, right? And what did they do as Christians? Those who had gave to those who didn't. Maybe they gave them jobs. Maybe they provided for them. Maybe they took them in. I don't know. I don't know exactly what it looked like, but what the verse tells me is that they cared about those people. And I mean, like, they visited people who were imprisoned. Like, prison back then didn't look like prison now, right? And so what it meant for them to go visit them, what it meant to align themselves with those prisoners and say, I'm coming to visit this guy who's in prison for being a Christian. And you're taking a mark on yourself, right? You are giving up a safety that you probably had, right? To say, I'm with that guy. That guy over there, hey, he's my friend and he's in prison. So to align himself with a prisoner, like, that's a big step, right? So they have this care for the poor and the imprisoned, those folks who lost their livelihood because of following Christ. This kind of persecution was so real to them. And so what the author is telling us is that heart of generosity came from their faith. That faith unlocked that heart of generosity. They believed in Jesus, the resurrection and the life. They believed in Jesus, the bread of life. And so they gave and gave and gave. And then, let's try to zoom out a little bit. What were they focused on? Not on self-preservation. They weren't focused on self-preservation. And I'm not going to make any hoarding toilet paper jokes or whatever, but when things go wrong, we immediately are like, how can I take care of myself? And I get that, especially if you got a family, you got a big family, you got a bunch of kids, like, you got to do certain things. They're your first responsibility, absolutely. But is our mindset self-preservation or is it self-sacrifice? Is it on generosity or is it on hoarding? A friend of mine here talked about ministering in the opposite spirit. Like, whatever the spirit of the world is, can we minister in the opposite one, right? If the spirit of the world is hoard, can we be generous? If the spirit of the world is preservation, can we be sacrificial, right? If the spirit of the world around us is anxiety and overwhelming, like, lack of peace, can we be peace? Can we be wholeness? Can we be the type of people in our communities who are basically handing out peace, right? Like in the midst of anxiety, a smile. Like, don't probably give someone who has a ton of anxiety right now a hug, because I'm sure that will not help. But like, can we be the kind of people who are generous with our peace? You know what I'm saying? Like, the fruit of the Spirit that's growing in your life, it's not for you to eat, it's for you to give away. Can you give away peace? Can you give away joy? Can you give away self-control right now? You know what I'm saying? Like, can you give away the fruit that the Spirit is growing in your life? Can you be generous with it? Can you? And they were willing to bear their cross even when it got tough. And right now our cross is not the same cross we were carrying 2 months ago. You know what I'm saying? We have a new thing to bear here, and we have a new thing on top of what we were bearing before. And I want to speak to that specifically. Some of us came into this. Mark mentioned this last week. Some of us came into this situation with a laundry list of problems and suffering, and then this got added on top of it. Maybe getting laid off got added onto this. Maybe your job disappearing. Maybe your small business dissolving got added onto the list that you already had going. And now what do? Right? I don't have all of those answers. I don't. But what Hebrews is asking us to do is to not quit. And so I think there's an extra responsibility for those of us who have right now, right? If you didn't lose your job, if you didn't lose your home, if you're not in danger of financial instability, I think there's an extra burden on those of us right now, right? Like, there has to be. We have to be generous. Like the Old Testament says, give until your brother's need is gone completely. That's extravagant. Can we, I'm not telling anyone to give away, to sell their house, to do whatever. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we got to be people who minister in the opposite spirit. These are always times when Christians shine, right? When other people are afraid, we bring peace. When other people hoard, we are generous. That's what Christians got to do. And I think that's what this passage is asking us to do. These people were willing to pay extreme costs in order to love their neighbor. And Christ is our example. He went to the cross to love his neighbor. And that's the only reason that we can be here and talk about this and do this, is because we have the example of the perfect, generous Lord. And so can we be people more focused on loving our neighbor rather than on self-preservation? Can we be more focused on generosity than hoarding? And let us trust God now. Maybe you thought you trusted God before, and now the chips are down, and what are you going to do? A lot of us don't have another choice now but to trust him, that he really is going to be daily bread, that he really is going to be resurrection and the life, that he really is going to be the good shepherd, that he is the vine that our branches get nourishment from. Like, a lot of us are now in a place where we have no other choice but to trust him. And so I just want to ask you, do you have that kind of faith that won't let you quit? And can we be the kind of community that won't let each other quit? That sees a brother or sister in need and says, I'm not going to let you fall behind right now. We've got work to do together. That we are not those who shrink back and are destroyed, but we are those who have faith and preserve our souls together. So thank you so much for letting me share with you. I love you all so much, and I miss you. Maybe we'll see you in the not too distant future. No promises, but we'll see. Love you. Lord Jesus, thank you for being the resurrection and life. Thank you for being the bread of life. Thank you for being peace. Thank you for being everything for us, being our treasure, being our wisdom, being our King. And Jesus, we just ask now for extra peace. Lord, this is a hard time. This is a complicated time. We just ask, Lord, that you would be peace, that you would be shalom, that you'd be that wholeness that you promise. And for my brothers and sisters at Emmanuel, Lord, would you build them up together? Would this be a special time where the church comes together? Would this be a special time where generosity overflows? Would this be a special time where needs are met and the community sees how Christians treat each other, how Christians should treat each other? And I thank you that Emmanuel has been a light to their community. Thank you that Emmanuel has been a light to me and my family. I've heard so many wonderful stories already of their generosity and how they've adapted to face this together. So I just ask for more strength. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen.